For 6 months, my mother has repeated the same word over and over again. Forgive me. She says it in her sleep. She says it awake. She whispers it while she eats. She screams it in the middle of the night until the nurses have to sedate her. Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. Like a broken record, like a desperate prayer directed at someone we cannot see. The doctors say it's part of Alzheimer's, that patients sometimes get trapped in a mental loop repeating words or phrases without meaning, but I know that's not true. I know my mother is asking forgiveness for something real, something she did a long time ago, and that now, with her mind being destroyed piece by piece, she can no longer hide. My name is Gabriela, I'm 57 years old, and I thought I knew my mother. I thought I knew everything about Elena Vargas, the woman who raised me with a firm but fair hand, who worked 3 jobs to give my brother and me a good education. But it turns out we all keep secrets. And some are so heavy that not even a devastating disease can erase them. What I discovered while searching for the origin of that obsessive forgiveness changed everything. It changed how I see my childhood, how I understand my family, and how I look at the woman lying in that hospital bed repeating that word as if her life depended on it. Because maybe it does. Maybe after carrying guilt for decades, her sick brain is trying to free her in the only way it can, repeating, "Forgive me," until someone finally listens and understands why. If you want to know what terrible secret my mother is trying to confess, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Comment if you've ever discovered something about your family that changed everything. Please, stay until the end because what I found was worse than anyone could imagine. Everything began in March of this year when my mother had her first serious crisis. They found her in the street at 3 in the morning, barefoot and disoriented, walking in circles in front of a house that was no longer ours. The neighbors called the police and they called me. When I arrived at the hospital, she was sitting on a bed with that blank stare I had grown used to in recent months. But then she saw me and grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Forgive me," she said, looking straight into my eyes. "Forgive me, mija, forgive me." I asked why she was asking for forgiveness, but she just kept repeating it, more and more agitated, until they had to sedate her. I thought it was just confusion from the disease, Alzheimer's playing cruel tricks on her mind, but it didn't stop. From that night on, "forgive me" became her favorite word, sometimes her only word, and something about the way she said it gave me chills. It wasn't a casual apology, it was a desperate plea. My mother was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago, when she was only 73. At first, it was just small forgetfulness, lost keys, mixed-up appointments, names slipping away. Then it worsened quickly. She began getting lost in her own neighborhood, failing to recognize my brother Daniel in photos, forgetting that my father had died 15 years ago and asking for him constantly. We had to move her to an assisted living home in Querétaro, near where I lived, because she could no longer care for herself. It cost me $2,500 a month, money I could barely pay with my retired teacher's pension, but she was my mother. It was the least I could do after everything she had sacrificed for us, or at least that's what I thought then, before I knew the truth, before I understood that maybe her sacrifices were driven by something darker than simple maternal love. I visited my mother 3 times a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, always at 4 in the afternoon after my yoga class. It was a routine that gave me structure, that made me feel I could still do something for her, even though I knew that each visit I would find her more lost than before. But after that night at the hospital, the visits became different. She no longer received me with that confused but gentle smile. Now she looked at me with something that seemed like fear mixed with urgency, and she kept repeating that damn word. "Forgive me, Gabriela, forgive me." Sometimes she whispered it, other times she screamed it. The nurses told me she did it even when I wasn't there, that she woke up at dawn crying and begging for forgiveness. I asked her doctor if this was normal, and she said some Alzheimer's patients get stuck in repetitive verbal patterns, but usually without deep meaning. I didn't believe her. I knew my mother, and this meant something. I called my brother Daniel in Los Angeles, where he lived with his family. I told him about Mom's obsessive forgiveness, and he stayed silent for a long moment. "Do you think she's trying to tell us something?" he finally asked. I don't know, I said, but it's driving me crazy. I can't stop thinking about it. Why would she constantly ask for forgiveness? What did she do that was so terrible that not even Alzheimer's can erase the guilt? Daniel sighed. Mom wasn't perfect, Gabby. She was strict with us as kids, sometimes too strict. Maybe she regrets that. But I knew it wasn't that. This wasn't the guilt of a mother who hit too hard or was too demanding. This was bigger, deeper, something that had been buried for decades and was now resurfacing through the cracks Alzheimer's had opened in her mind. I asked Daniel to come to Mexico that I needed his help to investigate. He said he would come in 2 weeks. While waiting for Daniel, I began reviewing my mother's belongings we had stored in boxes when we moved her to the residence. Old clothes, documents, yellowwood photographs. I searched for something, anything that could explain her obsession with forgiveness. In one box, I found her marriage certificate, our birth certificates, the death certificates of my grandparents, all normal, all expected. But at the bottom of a shoebox, I found an old manila envelope, sealed with yellowed tape. I opened it carefully, and inside were newspaper clippings. They were from 1987, from a Guadalajara newspaper. The headlines talked about a car accident. Family of 4 dies in head-on collision on the road to Tepic. Driver of the other vehicle fled the scene. My heart began to beat faster. Why did my mother keep this? What did this have to do with her? I kept reading and found more clippings, all about the same accident, about the search for the fleeing driver who was never found. I checked the dates. The accident occurred November 12, 1987. That date sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I searched my memory, my own recollections of that year. I was 16 then. Daniel was 14. It was the year we moved from Guadalajara to Querétaro. Mom said it was for a better job opportunity, a position in a textile factory that paid more. I always assumed that was true, never questioned it. But now, looking at these clippings, I wondered if there was another reason. I checked more documents and found the rental contract for our new house in Querétaro. It was dated November 15th, 1987, 3 days after the accident. We moved 3 days after a family of 4 died in a crash where the driver fled the scene. That could not be a coincidence. My mother was running from something, and now, 38 years later, her sick brain was forcing her to confess. I went to see my mother with the clippings in my bag. I needed to confront her. I needed to know the truth. But when I arrived at her room and found her asleep with her hands gripping the sheets, murmuring "forgive me," even in her dreams, I realized it was impossible. I couldn't get answers from someone who didn't know her own name half the time. I couldn't interrogate a woman whose mind was disappearing. But I tried anyway. I sat beside her bed, and when she woke up, I showed her the clippings. "Mom, what is this?" I asked. "Why did you keep these articles about an accident?" She looked at the papers without understanding at first, but then her eyes focused on the photographs of the victims. 4 smiling faces, a man, a woman, and 2 small girls. The Mendoza family. And my mother began to cry. "Forgive me," she sobbed louder than ever. "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. The girls, the poor girls. I'm so sorry." I felt the air leave my lungs. My mother knew who they were. My mother was connected to that accident somehow. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed up looking at the clippings over and over, trying to find any explicit connection to my mother. There was none. The articles only mentioned the victims, the Mendoza family from Guadalajara, and the unknown driver who fled the scene. There were no witnesses, no vehicle description beyond it being dark and possibly a sedan. The investigation had gone cold quickly. The next morning, I called the Guadalajara police. I gave them the case number and asked if they still had records. The officer said he would search the old archives and call me back. 3 days later, he did. "We have the file," he said. "It's a cold case. We never found the driver." "Why, are you asking?" I explained that my mother with Alzheimer's seemed obsessed with asking forgiveness and had kept clippings of the accident. There was a long pause.
Ma'am, did your mother live in Guadalajara in 1987? Yes, I confirmed. We moved to Querétaro days after the accident. The officer asked for her full name and date of birth. I heard typing on the other end. After a few minutes, his voice returned more serious. Ms. Vargas, it says here your mother owned a dark blue Chevrolet Malibu in 1987. That vehicle was reported sold in November of that same year. My heart stopped. Sold when exactly? November 13th, he replied, one day after the accident. Ms. Vargas, I think we need to talk more about this. I need you to come to the station when you can. I hung up with trembling hands. My mother had sold her car one day after the accident, a car matching the vague description of the hit-and-run vehicle. I didn't want to believe what this implied, but the pieces were fitting together in a horrifying and perfect way. Daniel finally arrived in Mexico, and I told him everything I had discovered. He went pale as I showed him the clippings and told him about the call with the police. "Gabby," he said after a long silence, "there's something I never told you." "What?" I asked, stomach tightening. That night, the night of the accident, Mom got home very late. I was awake studying, and I heard her come in crying. I went to see what happened and found her in the bathroom washing her hands over and over like they couldn't get clean. There was blood on her blouse. I felt dizzy. What did she say? She told me she cut herself at the factory, that it was nothing. But she was shaking, Gabby. She was terrified. The next day she sold the car, and 3 days later we moved. I was 14 and I didn't understand, but I always knew something bad happened that night. I always knew. I covered my face with my hands. Our mother had killed 4 people and fled, and we had lived our whole lives not knowing. Daniel and I faced a decision no one should ever have to make. Do we turn in our 75-year-old mother with advanced Alzheimer's for a crime she committed nearly 40 decades ago? Do we destroy her memory and ours by exposing the truth? But we also thought of the Mendoza family, of those 2 little girls, of the grandparents who likely lived years wondering who had taken their family from them. Didn't they deserve justice? Didn't they deserve to know the truth? We argued all night. Daniel said Mom was sick, couldn't defend herself, would spend her final years in prison or a psychiatric hospital instead of the residence where she had some dignity. I argued the victims deserved justice, that we couldn't ignore this. But deep down, we were both shattered, because no matter what we chose, someone would be betrayed, either our mother or the victims. Before we could decide, the Guadalajara detective came to Querétaro. He introduced himself as Detective Ramirez and asked to speak privately. We sat in a cafe near the residence, and he placed a thick file on the table. "I've been reviewing the Mendoza case. Your mother is now the primary suspect based on circumstantial evidence, the car model, the immediate sale, the sudden move. But here's the problem. Your mother has advanced Alzheimer's. She can't be properly interrogated. She can't defend herself. And frankly, no prosecutor is going to want to take this to trial. She's a dying woman who probably doesn't understand where she is." "So what do we do?" Daniel asked. The detective sighed. "I still need to talk to her. I need to try to obtain an official confession. But you must understand, even if she confesses, it's unlikely she will ever see the inside of a cell. Her illness is her legal protection now." The irony hit me hard. The Alzheimer's destroying her was also saving her from consequences.
We brought Detective Ramirez to see my mother. She was awake, sitting in her chair looking out the window. When we entered, she looked at us without recognition. "Mrs. Vargas," the detective said softly, walking closer. "My name is Detective Ramirez. I need to talk to you about something that happened many years ago." My mother looked at him with empty eyes. "Where is my husband?" she asked. "He's coming for me today." "Your husband passed away, ma'am, but I need you to tell me about November 1987. Do you remember that date?" My mother shook her head, but then her eyes filled with tears. "Forgive me," she began.
Forgive me, forgive me." The detective leaned in. "Forgive you for what, Mrs. Vargas? What did you do that you need forgiveness for?" And then, to our surprise, my mother spoke with more clarity than she had in months. "I was driving too fast. It was raining. I didn't see them until it was too late. The car crossed in front and I couldn't brake. And then the crash, the terrible crash." The detective recorded everything as my mother spoke. The words spilled from her like water from a broken dam, as if she had been waiting decades to say them. "I saw the man in the other car," she continued. "I saw him move a little and I thought maybe he was alive, but I was so scared of going to jail, of leaving my children alone. So I kept driving. I left them there in the rain and kept driving. I cried all the way home. I washed my hands but couldn't get rid of the feeling of blood. The next day I sold the car to a man on the street for $300, a fraction of what it was worth, but I needed to get rid of it. I needed the evidence gone. And then we moved because I couldn't live in that city knowing what I'd done, knowing I'd killed a family and fled like a coward." Daniel cried silently. I was frozen. The detective stopped the recorder. "We have her confession," he said quietly. The detective gave us information about the Mendoza family. Roberto Mendoza, 38 years old, engineer. His wife Laura, 35, elementary school teacher. And their 2 daughters, Sofia, age 7, and Valentina, age 5. They were on their way to visit their grandparents in Tepic to celebrate Sofia's birthday. They never arrived. The Mendoza grandparents, Eduardo and Cristina, had died 5 years ago, the detective told us. But there was a brother, Roberto's brother, Carlos Mendoza, who still lived in Guadalajara. He had spent years searching for the driver who killed his family. Hired private investigators, offered rewards, never stopped seeking justice. And now we finally had answers for him. But those answers came in the form of my sick mother, unable to face true justice. I asked the detective if Carlos Mendoza would be told about the confession. "He has the right to know," he replied. "After 38 years, he deserves peace." Carlos Mendoza came to Querétaro 2 weeks later. The detective arranged a meeting at the police station. I didn't want to be there, didn't want to see the pain in the eyes of the man whose family my mother destroyed. But Daniel said we had to go, that we owed him our presence. Carlos was 65 years old, hair completely gray, eyes worn from too many tears. He looked at us with a mix of resentment and curiosity. "You're the children of Elena Vargas," he said. It wasn't a question. We nodded. "We're so sorry," I said, voice breaking. "We don't have words." He sat heavily in a chair. "I spent 38 years searching for answers. 38 years imagining the monster who killed my family and ran. And now you're telling me it was a scared mother who made a horrible mistake. How am I supposed to feel?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. Then he cried. That tired, broken man cried like a child. And we cried with him, connected by the pain my mother caused. After crying for what felt like hours, Carlos looked at us with a sharp intensity that scared me. "I want to see her," he said. "I want to see the woman who destroyed my life." Daniel and I exchanged uncertain glances. "Carlos," I said carefully, "she has advanced Alzheimer's. Most of the time she doesn't know where she is. I don't think it's a good idea." "I don't care," he replied firmly. "I've waited 38 years for this moment. I need to look in her eyes. I need her to know that I know what she did. Even if she forgets tomorrow, I need her to know it in that moment." The detective intervened. "I can authorize the visit if her family agrees, but I must warn you, you may not get the reaction you're hoping for. She is very sick." "I understand," Carlos said, "but I need this. For Roberto, for Laura, for my nieces, I need to close this chapter." Daniel finally nodded. I did too. If this could give him peace, who were we to deny him? We brought Carlos to the residence on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother was in her room, dozing in her chair as usual. When we walked in, she opened her eyes slowly. Carlos stood in the doorway, staring at her with emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. "This is her," he said quietly. "The woman who killed my family." He stepped forward and knelt in front of her wheelchair. My mother looked at him, confused. "Mrs. Vargas?" he said, voice trembling. My name is Carlos Mendoza. I killed my brother Roberto, his wife Laura, and their daughters Sofia and Valentina 38 years ago. You fled and left us without answers for nearly 40 decades. My mother blinked, processing slowly. Then tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. Forgive me, she whispered. The girls. I killed the girls. Carlos began crying as well. Why? He asked. Why did you run? Why didn't you stop? My mother looked at him with a moment of painful clarity. Because I am a coward, she said simply. Carlos remained kneeling in front of my mother for several minutes, both of them crying in silence. Finally, he stood and wiped his eyes. I can't forgive her, he said. Maybe one day, but not today. What she didn't just take my family, it took 38 years of peace from me. I became someone obsessed with justice, someone trapped in the past. I ruined 3 marriages because I couldn't let go. I never had children because I was terrified of losing them like I lost my nieces. Her cowardice didn't just kill 4 people that night, it killed parts of me too. We understand, Daniel said, and we're deeply sorry. Carlos nodded. But I have answers now, and that's something. He looked at my mother one last time. She had fallen asleep again, exhausted by the emotion. I'm letting go of my anger, Carlos said. Not for her, for me. I've carried this long enough. And he left. The case was submitted to the prosecutor, but just as the detective predicted, they decided not to press charges. The legal opinion was that my mother was incompetent to stand trial due to her advanced mental condition. Besides, she would spend her remaining months or years under medical care anyway. Having that care take place in a prison would not serve any real purpose of justice. Technically, she was under house arrest at the care facility, which meant she could not leave without authorization, but given her condition, that was irrelevant. The press found out about the story. For weeks, we were harassed by reporters wanting to know how we felt knowing our mother was a fugitive killer. I lost friendships. People I'd known for years suddenly didn't want to be associated with me. Daniel lost a major client in Los Angeles when the story spread on social media. We paid for our mother's crimes in ways we never imagined. And she, protected by her illness, continued living in her small world without real consequences. Visiting my mother became torture. Every time I saw her, I thought of the 4 people she killed. I thought of Sofia, who never got to celebrate her 8th birthday, of Valentina, who never went to elementary school, of Roberto and Laura, who never watched their daughters grow up. And then I looked at this frail, confused woman in a wheelchair and tried to reconcile the killer with the mother who raised me. One night, I asked her directly, Mom, did you ever truly love me, or was everything just guilt? Did you take care of me because you were my daughter, or because you were trying to make up for the lives you took? She looked at me without understanding. I don't even know if she processed the question. Forgive me, she said, as always, and I didn't know whether she was apologizing for the accident, for being an imperfect mother, or for ruining our lives with her secret. Maybe for all of it. Maybe that endless forgiveness covered decades of accumulated guilt. 3 months after her confession, my mother stopped saying, "Forgive me." She simply stopped, as if once the secret was finally spoken and someone listened, her mind decided there was nothing left to apologize for. Now she just sits in silence, staring out the window, sometimes smiling at something only she can see. Doctors say she is in the final stages of the disease, that she probably doesn't have much time left. And I don't know how to feel about that. Part of me wants her to go quickly, to end this suffering for everyone. Another part, the child still living inside me, wants to hold on a little longer, because she is still my mother, despite everything. Daniel visits more often now, as if he also senses time running out. We sit together in her room without talking much, just being present. And sometimes I wonder if she knows we're there, if somewhere in her shattered mind she still recognizes us as her children. 6 months have passed since I discovered my mother's secret, and I still don't know how to live with it. I see mothers with children in the park and wonder what secrets they carry. I see elderly people on the street and wonder what guilt lives inside them. Because now I know that we all have shadows, that no one is entirely good or entirely evil. My mother killed 4 people out of cowardice, and she also raised me with love. Both things are true, and I have to learn how to live with both truths. Carlos Mendoza and I write to each other from time to time. We've become something like friends, tied together by a tragedy none of us chose. He tells me stories about his family, and I listen, offering the only gift I can, someone who remembers the victims as people and not statistics. I showed the photos to my mother once, photos of Roberto, Laura, Sophia, and Valentina. She stared at them for a long time, and then a tear rolled down her cheek. But she said nothing. The word forgive was gone. Now there was only silence. And maybe silence is the most honest thing she can offer us, because some things don't have enough words to explain or apologize for. Some things simply exist, and we must learn to live with them. I keep visiting my mother 3 times a week. I keep holding her hand, even though I now know those hands killed, because in the end, she is still my mother, and I am still her daughter. Love doesn't disappear just because you discover the person you love did something unforgivable. It just becomes complicated, clouded, heavier. But it stays. When my mother finally dies, I don't know if I will cry for her or for the victims or for all of us trapped in this terrible story. Maybe I'll cry for the 4 lives that never continued, and for the woman who lived 60 more years but lived them all in a prison of guilt. Because in the end, my mother received a sentence, not from a judge, but from her own conscience. And that sentence destroyed her long before Alzheimer's did. The forgiveness she repeated wasn't just for the victims, it was for herself. A forgiveness she could never grant because some guilt is too big to forgive. And now I carry her secret as she carried it for decades. It is my inheritance, my cross, the truth about who my mother really was and how that truth changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about love, about guilt and forgiveness. This is my story. The story of how I discovered my mother was a fugitive killer, and how that didn't change the fact that she was still my mother. And I have to live with both truths for the rest of my days.